What is up, CSP fam? This video podcast is dedicated to talking about principles and ideas that help you brand your business using story-based marketing. Remember, your brand isn't what you say about your organization, it's what other people tell other people about your organization. So with some time elapsed already, let's dive right in. So how does culture within your own organization help you in story-based marketing and branding? That is the question we're going to ask today's guest. I have again with me Super Bowl champion, Chief Culture Officer of Conquer Ninja Gym franchise, and entrepreneur in business and cultural leadership, Ben Utecht. Thanks again, Ben, for being here and joining us on this podcast today.
No problem, John. Thanks for having me.
So let's dive right into this, Ben. Culture really is kind of an elusive term. Can you define for us what is meant by the culture of an organization?
Great question. And I think culture has really become one of the most subjective things discussed within the corporate culture and community because it means something different to each individual, right? So part of the goal as a culture officer is to take what is typically subjective and make it objective, make it material, make it an actual product that you can define and then begin to actually grow and distribute across an organization. And so what that takes is drawing a line in the sand as leaders within an organization, right? Because everybody's going to come into that organization with their own foundational belief system, right? So what that means is you're going to have a culture by design or default, okay? So why not design it?
Sure.
And so how do you take the subjective and make it objective? Well, you have to define culture objectively and collectively. And so that's what I set out to do. And because I believe that what you believe equals how you behave, I really focused on having culture be directly connected to the intrinsic beliefs of every human being. Okay, so I define culture as the foundation of intrinsic beliefs that bind and inspire people and communities to work together in unity and purpose.
Right. That kind of goes back to our last year's podcast when we talked a lot about like the story-based pyramid and kind of how do we establish a culture. We have to first start with some sort of foundational feeling, a feeling that points to a belief. That belief points to us being able to set expectations, and then those expectations then kind of allow us to set a culture or do an action step. So if you missed last year's podcast, go back and rewatch that. But what's interesting to me, Ben, is how do you get people from, like you said, they're going to have different backgrounds, different beliefs, all different lifestyles, walks of life, coming together to really truly unify under one organization.
Sure.
I mean, you have to have some sort of established beliefs that everybody can kind of come to the table and agree upon.
Yeah, that's the tough part. And that's I think why a lot of organizations fail in culture is because they sit back as executive leaders and they look out into their employee base and they say, gosh, we have to please everybody. And so how do we have a culture that can touch everyone in the way that they really need it?
Right.
When I come from a perspective that's challenging, which is culture is the leader's choice. And as leaders who have defined the mission and vision of the organization, it's your job to consider, to strategize, and to decide what that belief system is. And then you, moving forward, you hire or onboard into that belief system. And it becomes a process by which now the people that you are interviewing and that you are bringing into the organization are already in alignment with the belief system you have. Now that's the tough part, because when you draw a line in the sand, you will lose a certain amount of talent because
Sure.
their own intrinsic beliefs are going to be different from that.
Right.
So that's one way that you can actually, over time, bring people together. The other way is that a part of the leader's role in understanding their current organization is to include all of the employees in that decision making.
Right.
Right? So leadership can say, okay, we know here are 4 pillars that these are foundational to leadership.
Right.
But you know what? We want to add 4 more that are foundational to our employees. So employees tell us what are the belief pillars that are most dear to you, that you most connect with. And most of the time, John, in the experience that I've had consulting, is no matter what people's political views, religious views, financial views, familial views, most of the time, because we're all humans, we tend to agree on beliefs like integrity, which we talked about recently, or courage, or commitment, or wisdom, or empathy, or grace, or all of these things that we practice every day.
Right.
Genuinely, people are unified on.
Sure.
And that, that to me is, I think, a positive in the creation of culture.
Right. Now, you won a Super Bowl championship, and you had a team that all believed in the same thing, the same cultures. In fact, I know in the past you've talked about your Super Bowl ring and has the word faith on it and kind of talked about what that meant. But how did that help you guys achieve establishing that culture? How did that help you achieve a Super Bowl win?
Sure. Well, from the very first team meeting I ever had with Hall of Fame coach Tony Dungy, his motivation, his passion behind coaching was to build a family. And the acronym for family in football is forget about me, I love you. And so how do you take 53 guys from 53 different parts of the country, sometimes the world, that have 53 different backgrounds and beliefs and views, and how do you get all of them to come together
Right.
in one locker room? And that really starts with the leader, right? So from Dungy's perspective, he wanted to use that culture in order to bring these men together, and he could never do that unless he himself was actually practicing consistently what he was preaching.
Right.
So the goal, and why we have the only Super Bowl ring in the history of football to have a belief system engraved in the ring, like you said, the word faith, nothing to do with religion. It was about creating the family environment. Right. So the acronym for faith that I experienced was freedom for all individuals to trust and hope in each other.
Yeah.
I don't know too many humans that would say that trust and hope are a bad thing.
Right.
And that if practiced, they can actually be 2 of the most impactful things that any organization would experience.
Right.
So those are the kind of qualities that, when practiced and when collectively chosen by all team members, to believe in, have a significant impact on the performance of a team.
Yeah. And I think one thing that sometimes is overlooked is, where does culture have to start? Does it start with the employees? Is that where it needs to start? And, do they all have it, all the culture, or is it just the leadership that has the culture? Because I've been part of organizations in the past where, we've got a mission statement, we got values, we got all those things, and that's all good. That's really good to have. I'm not knocking that. But maybe, there's a couple people who don't follow that, and maybe they're in leadership, or maybe they're, an employee, but they're not following the same cultural rules. So where does kind of, yes, establishing that culture, but making sure that culture is being lived out start?
Well, I have to say, what I foundationally believe in, which is culture is the leader's choice.
Right.
And do you want to have one by design or default, like we talked about? Usually default cultures are cultures that allow the base of an organization to I see a lot of times bring more confusion and more division than they actually do together. Because when you try to please every single culture need that a person has, you actually tend to separate people instead of bring people together. Now, when leadership goes out into the organization and discovers what those foundational beliefs are and brings it back to the boardroom and sits down and works together with their leadership to capture the essence of that and define it. These are the 7 pillars we're going to choose.
Right.
Okay? And here's a development program that we're going to create around each of those pillars to actually practice these things. And when we put our foot down and say, this is who we are as a company, this is what we believe in, we might lose some people.
Right.
But we will gain new people that we can hire into that.
But won't people, I mean, to play the devil's advocate just
yeah.
a little bit here, but like, won't people be like, well, you guys are just being, you're only hiring people that act like you, that look like you, kind of, once you get some of that criticism,
absolutely, you'll get that criticism.
Not like that matters, but
it does matter. I actually do think that it matters. But what is the goal of business? What would you say the goal of any business is?
To be profitable.
Okay.
Right.
So we're not talking about organizations where what we're trying to do is build tolerant relationships.
Right.
We're talking about organizations that have very specific strategic goals that they have to meet. We're talking about an industry where everything really revolves around profitability. It's the only way companies stay alive and can continue to hire and provide jobs to individuals. So I would think any individual would rather be in a company that they fit into the culture with. That's where they're going to thrive the most. So you can kind of see it from both perspectives. And again, that is where that line in the sand is. So when you get into those big organizations, sometimes you can begin to create those subcultures based upon those different beliefs. And then how do you manage those subcultures?
I know that you talked about the hiring process and drafting process in the NFL, and you could have this very, very talented player. They could be the best player, but if they don't play on the team, then it's not worth bringing into your culture.
Yeah, so case in point, the 2 teams that I played for, Indianapolis Colts World Championship, the Cincinnati Bengals, who when I joined the team hadn't won a playoff game in 20 years. Was it an issue of talent? No. I went from Peyton Manning to Carson Palmer, who was an incredible quarterback and perennial Pro Bowler, Heisman Trophy winner. So was it an issue of talent between a World Championship organization and an organization that struggled to win? No, it was a culture issue, and it was a practicing of specific beliefs. In Indianapolis, our Hall of Fame general manager drafted based upon a player's integrity. That was a priority in the draft process. They would rather draft a third round, a lower round draft pick, a lower round talent who had their college degree, who was the captain of the team, who was involved in the community, because that's a dependable and trustworthy person.
Right.
Versus other teams who might believe, look, we want to give great talent a chance. It doesn't matter what they have done on or off the field.
Right.
And so you draft a young talent in who has a lot of off the field problems, didn't really work hard in school, didn't get his degree. The chances of having more issues with that personality and having more behavioral problems with that individual are greater. It doesn't mean that it will happen,
right?
But it is probably greater.
Right.
And that's why, choosing a very specific culture and drafting into that culture was such a benefit to our team, and really helped. I really believe, put the right 53 guys on a team to go win a world championship.
Right. And kind of on that note, so how does caring about culture from a leader's perspective affect what people say about your organization?
Yeah, I mean, again, it circles back to some great points that you made. It really is what people say about your organization, right? And we have to deal with perception and reality all the time. So if you have the opportunity and the determination to choose culture, okay, you have more control over the outcomes of behavior. And you as leaders then know what kind of behavior is going to have the greatest impact on the people that experience your business. So choose it.
Right.
And then build development around it so that more consistently people that experience your business will walk away pleased and positively impacted.
Right.
And guess what? They will drive more business to you.
Right. And that, my friends, is story branding. It's what other people say about your organization, not what you say it is. So if you ever want to change the way people talk about your brand, start by asking yourself, how does the culture of my organization play into what people say about my organization? And that's all the time we have for today. Thanks, Ben, so much for being here and joining us again on this podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel and like us on social media. I'm John Oney, and we'll see you next time.